But first, I'd like to introduce Phil Micans, who's the president and founder of International Anti-Aging Systems.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to have you here. I'm going to keep it short, but we're not going to do a formal presentation. We're going to have a chat with you, which I hope you enjoy. I'd just like to say that we formed International Anti-Aging Systems in 1991, and our goal has always been to provide the latest commercially available substances, and we do so from 3 depots in London, in Hong Kong and Singapore. Dr. Ward Dean, standing next to me, who's, as you already heard, his impressive CV, is our medical director, and I will hand over to him shortly. And he is one of the pioneers in anti-aging medicine, and I don't say that lightly in any way, shape or form. Just to reiterate what the kind lady said about him, he and Professor Vladimir Dillman hold the neuroendocrine theory of aging. He is also a specialist in biological aging measurement, and he also, here in the States, very famously wrote a series of books called Smart Drugs and Nutrients, which introduced to the healthy individual ways to improve their cognitive abilities. So with that in mind, we hope that you enjoy our presentation. I will try very hard, being a Brit, to use American terminology. So please bear with me if I slip up and say vitamins and things like that from time to time. Thank you. So, Dr. Dean, I think we're going to start with a little talk about metformin, aren't we?
Well, actually, we're going to talk about IAS. IAS was founded back in the early 90s, about 90 or 91, which was the time the book Smart Drugs and Nutrients came out. And that's when I met Phil and learned about his company. And many of the things that we talked about in Smart Drugs and Nutrients at that time were drugs unavailable in the United States. Vinpocetine was a drug from Hungary. Phosphatidylserine, acetyl L-carnitine were both drugs in Italy. There were a lot of drugs that were available for Americans, but they had to have prescriptions for them. And Phil and IAS stepped up and started carrying all of these, paracetam, Nutripil, another cognitive enhancer, which was an Italian, was it Italian, French?
It was originally Italian.
Yeah.
Belgian, actually, originally Belgian.
Anyway, he made these drugs available to people in the United States. And he publicized the FDA's personal import policy, where people can legally import uncontrolled drugs. You can't bring in a controlled substance, but if it's class 5, you can import it, a reasonable amount for your own personal use, and that's usually considered about a 3-month supply. So they had no problem with people ordering from overseas, bringing in these prescriptions, these drugs without prescriptions. One of the best, safest, most effective anti-aging drugs that they made available, which is a personal favorite of mine, is Metformin. Metformin is the best-selling anti-diabetic drug in the world. Type 2 diabetics, it's the #1 choice, and it's also should be used by type 1 diabetics in addition to their insulin. However, it requires a prescription, and many doctors will not write a prescription unless the patient is diabetic. Metformin has been shown in clinical studies and lab studies to extend the maximum lifespan of virtually every species of animal that it's been tested on, from worms all the way up. Right now there is a human study going on called Targeting Aging with Metformin. And this is a real paradigm shift for the FDA, because the FDA doesn't believe that the aging process is a disease. And in order to do a clinical study, you've got to be trying to treat a disease. Well, in this case, in this study with Metformin, they've taken 3,000 men from 60 to I think 75, placed them on Metformin, and the endpoints are onset of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, or death. And they're going to see if the Metformin will delay the onset of all of these endpoints. But I don't think it's necessary, based on all the other thousands of studies that are out there, to wait until this study is finished for everybody to be on metformin. How many people in this room are now taking metformin? Very good. Now, I know a lot of people that I'll prescribe, they say, no, I don't want to take a drug. And I say, well, it's not really a drug. It's a derivative of Galega officinalis, an herb that's been used for hundreds of years in Europe for diabetes. Metformin itself has been available since the mid-50s. In Europe, we didn't get it until the mid-90s. But it is now widely accepted. But I still know a lot of patients, their doctors won't give them a prescription. IAS can provide metformin at a reasonable cost. Metformin is cheap, very safe. The only adverse effects, in about 20% of the people that take it, they'll get some GI disturbance, which if they cut the dose down, start with crumbs and just gradually increase the dose, you'll develop tolerance to it. It may cause impaired B12 absorption. Say again? Oh, metformin does not cause ED that I know of. I'll talk to you about that afterwards. If you've got some information, I'd like to know about it. Because it impairs the absorption of B12, I tell people, so take B12. But anyway, I would strongly recommend that. A corollary to metformin is another drug called acarbose. This is another anti-diabetic drug. Acarbose blocks the conversion of complex carbohydrates into sugar, which raises your insulin. Insulin takes the sugar in your blood, drives into the cells where it's stored as fat. So A-C-A-R-B-O-S-E. That's Precoce is the brand name for that. It's made by Bayer. It is the most widely sold anti-diabetic drug in China. You'll have a hard time finding a doctor in the United States to write for it. I think I'm probably the only guy in Northwest Florida that ever writes a prescription for it. But I use metformin and acarbose in virtually all of my patients because I strive to keep the blood sugar down and insulin down. Neither acarbose nor metformin will cause hypoglycemia. They normalize your blood sugar, keep your insulin down, and as a result, people usually feel better, have more energy, lose their carbohydrate cravings, and lose weight. Now, we just saw a talk about the stem cells and how you can go off and pay $10,000 or $20,000 to get stem cells for your fatty liver. Well, the drug of choice for fatty liver is metformin. Metformin is great for PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. It normalizes ovarian function, and that used to be a problem for me because most people with PCOS have problems with fertility, and then if they get pregnant, then it's like, well, what do we do now? Well, I didn't give pregnant women anything. I'd have to take them off metformin. But about 2 years ago, New England Journal of Medicine did a study on 400 obese, non-diabetic women. They put them on 3 grams daily of metformin, which is a heroic dose. I rarely go that high unless the patient weighs 200 or 300 pounds. And they put them on this 3 grams a day throughout their pregnancy. They had less eclampsia, less hypertension. They lost weight, fewer neonatal and perinatal complications. All the babies came out healthy no matter what, whether they were on the placebo or on the metformin. So this was kind of a testament to the safety of metformin. So if you're not on metformin and you can't talk your doctor into getting you a prescription, I recommend coming by and getting ordering it from IAS. Yes?
What's the right age to start taking metformin?
What is the right age? Well, one of the studies shows that overweight teenage girls benefit from it. So I don't think there is an age limit. And Professor Anisimov from Russia did a study in mice, and he showed that the sooner you start it, the better the effect on the maximum lifespan of the animal. Question was, can berberine replace metformin? Berberine does a lot of the same things as metformin. I don't think it's as well tested or as effective. For people that are allergic to metformin, that's one other side effect with metformin that's very rare. You get a terrible itchy rash, and I've had about 3 patients that suffered from that. They can't take metformin. Them I would tell to take berberine, but you can probably buy metformin cheaper than berberine, and I think it's more effective.
Obviously, we have a lot of time constraints there. We have about 20 minutes. I do invite you to come and meet us on the IS booth. We're right at the front. I hope you can't miss us. We are a diamond sponsor of this event because I think it's an ideal fit for what we do. And we like meeting interesting people such as yourselves. So if you have your personal questions, please bring them to us because that's what we're here, help you find solutions. I wanted to talk about 2 things that excite me. The first is rapamycin, which is an mTOR inhibitor. Now, I'm not going to say much more about it because I think we should all go and listen to Bill Falloon's talk, which I'm not sure if it's today or tomorrow, but please look up Bill Falloon from Life Extension talking because he's got some really exciting information. So I'll leave that subject there. But I wanted to tell you very quickly that I've been working a lot in Russia, in St. Petersburg, with the Biogerontological Institute. And indeed, Dr. Dean used to work with the late Professor Vladimir Dilman when the publication of Neuroendocrine Theory of Aging, who was from the same institute. And in a nutshell, some 30, 40 years ago, the gentleman by the name of Professor Vladimir Kavinson, who was at that time a colonel in the KGB military, received a call from the Kremlin. And that call basically said that there are lots of American-made new battlefield weapons that would affect their troops. One was a laser that would be blind. And his instructions were to find something that could make their troops' eyes recover. This led, and he had, of course, the entire resources of the state at his disposal. In fact, he said to me later, had it been Russia today, he would have never been able to do it because the resources weren't available. But under the Soviet Union, things were a bit different. So what I'm telling you was a Soviet military secret. And in a nutshell, they discovered that short-chain peptides that are found in foods, these are amino acids no longer than six linked, are gene switches. Now that has a profound implication. We have written a book, a scientific book on this subject, which is called Peptides in the Epigenetic Control of Aging, because this story explains epigenetics in a heartbeat. And what they discovered, that specific short-chain peptides from different food groups act as gene switches. So what do I mean? What implications does this have? Well, if, for example, if you were to take the testes, as a man, if you were to take the testes peptide, you would actually invigorate your testosterone response naturally. This is a big story, and I know it's hard to believe, but there are many, many implications. They have a pineal peptide by the name of, there are lots of crazy names, I don't want to bore you with them, epitalamin, also known as endolutin, and it massively increases telomere length. How do I know that? Because they ran a 12-year study in over 4,000 factory workers. You just don't get things like that in the West. People don't do them, but the Soviets did. And we're very, very excited about this because if you know which gene you need to silence, switch a cancer gene off, etc., you can use these peptides. It's a massive story. I invite you to come over to the booth and check it out. But I'm sure all of you in this room probably, has anyone heard about these short-chain peptides? Wow, fantastic. I hope you're all IS members and reading our magazines, Aging Matters. Great, that's a lovely number because most people haven't heard about it. Now, sometimes I get people say to me, yeah, but, you know, it's Russian research. Who can believe them? Well, now I'm going to be the madman at the conference because I'd like you to find some time to Google pixie dust peptide. Yes, the Disney cartoon, putting the fairy dust, you know, reading your story to your daughter in the evening. It's a crazy name, But you'll discover that in 2008 there was a short BBC documentary. You should find it easily. And it explains what the American military are doing with peptides. And it is quite honestly staggering, because you will see in that documentary, you'll meet a man from Pennsylvania who regrew his fingers after he lost them in an accident. I'm not talking about picking the finger up and stitching it back on. He lost them. And they regrew using pixie dust peptide, which is a short chain peptide from the Russian research. We know how it works. This particular one comes, believe it or not, from the lining of a pig's bladder, extracellular matrix. He regrew his fingers in 4 weeks, perfectly. If you held his hand up, you would not know which one he'd lost. If you go to Time magazine in 2012, you'll see a front cover of a gentleman called Corporal Hernandez, who's in the US military, and he dropped a grenade on himself in Afghanistan. He blew away 70% of his right thigh. They regrew that right thigh in 6 months with pixie dust peptide. I have it on good authority, they've just regrown a hand. So ladies and gentlemen, we are salamanders. And I think this technology has enormous implications. So I do invite you to come over, find out a bit more about it, and we'd be delighted to fill you in with details. Ward, would you like to say anything?
Let me just add one comment about the peptides. I've got a recent patient, 79-year-old retired Navy bomber pilot. On his blood test several months ago, he had platelet count over 5,000. High end of platelet count is about 450. He went to see an oncologist who promptly diagnosed him with thrombocytosis and wanted him to undergo chemo radiation because he was sure he was going to die. The family came to me, wanted to know, well, what could they do? I thought, and I didn't know, but I thought, well, we'll use the bone marrow peptide, the pineal polypeptide, and normally you use about 1 pill twice a day for 10 days for one month, and then you repeat it 3 months later, and you do that cyclically. They bought 3 boxes of both, took it continuously for a month, repeated his blood test. His platelet count dropped to 500. Still just over the upper end of normal, but 10% of what the oncologist was going to treat him with chemo and radiation. So family was really pleased. He seems to be doing a lot better, and I've seen this over and over with these peptides. They normalize tissue, so if you've got an abnormal tissue, whether it's hyperthyroid, hypothyroid, you take the thyroid peptide with the pineal polypeptide, and it normalizes the functioning of that tissue. And the Russians report that they are completely without adverse side effects. So these are really remarkable, and I use them when I don't know of anything else to do.
In fact, you can come and see some photos on the booth of retina scans, because the clinic in St. Petersburg that applies the full therapies is run by a lovely lady called Professor Svetlana Trefimova. And she has a clinic it's called the Tree of Life Clinic, and she specializes in eyesight. I think they're probably one of the very few clinics in the world that treats retinal pigmentosa. They have enormous success in eyesight. They've taken Ward knows these studies. They've taken people who are 90% blind in their eye to less than 30% blind in their eye. That is an enormous, when somebody's that far gone, normally very little can be done. People who are, say, less than 30% blind in their eye, they almost take them back to normal. How is the protocol done? How is that particular administration? It's injections into the orbit of the eye, subcutaneous injections into the skin surrounding the eye. It's done every day for 10 days. And then there's a course of oral peptides, which is continued for several months. This is not a mega expensive expensive treatment. We're nowhere near stem cell prices. Okay, this is a very affordable treatment, and happily, I'm very interested about bioidentical hormones. I think they have a wonderful role to play. I use several myself, melatonin perhaps being the most important to me personally. But one of the issues, of course, with taking any hormone is you have, maybe with the exception of melatonin, is you have to monitor yourself. If I was taking testosterone every day, I should have my blood work done because I don't want to overdose, right? Cause lots of pain. You don't do that with peptides. The gene's on, the gene's off. There's no middle ground. And that's why, as Ward has elucidated, that the Russians in over 1 million dosages, documented dosages, over 35 years, have not seen any side effects. It's quite remarkable. So I know it's probably a big bombshell. It was to me when I learnt about it 3 or 4 years ago. But I think that what we're going to see in anti-aging, we've seen, if you will, the bioidentical hormone wave. But we're just beginning to see at conferences like this, the next wave, in my view, is the peptide wave. You're going to hear a lot more about peptides. Anything else you want to say? Okay, so we're going to probably wind it up there. I do invite you, please, to come to our booth, 113. We're right at the front. Come over. We've got free magazines for you, free Aging Matters. We're giving everybody a free year's subscription if you sign up. We've got a prize draw for $1,500 of products of your choice, and we'd like you to come and meet Dr. Dean and my other professional staff. I've been a pharmacist, I have a nutritionist, so we have a few medical professions here on the booth, and we really look forward to seeing you guys there. So thank you very much for your attention.